It's Ron Reader Digs the Universe. I'm Ron Reader, and this is Ron Reader Digs the Universe, and tonight, white people have had decades to learn this. To learn what, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Last week in the Oklahoma State Senate, during a committee discussion on the racial wealth gap, Republican Senator David Rader, a white guy, as the vast majority of Republicans are these days, white, not guys, lots of gals in the Republican Party. David Rader made a racist fool of himself. From invoking the old yellow peril racist mean denigrating Asian Americans to invoking the old model minority racist trope patronizingly placing Asian Americans on a false racial pedestal to white-splaining the black nuclear family to a black man who is also an expert in the field, to blaming the economic condition of black people on black people, then blaming it, of course, on big government. Sort of a cherry on top, throwing in a little big government. David Rader shamelessly displayed his utter ignorance of the topic being discussed, while at the same time implicitly asserting his qualifications to be participating in the discussion. Something of a full racist shit show, the likes of which we are seeing a lot lately. Now, Rader is only about 10 years older than I am. He has more or less grown up, come of age, and lived his adult life in essentially the same America that I have. Here are a few things I have learned in those years of being an American that, for some very odd reason, David Rader has not learned. In the 1980s, I learned of the racist yellow peril trope reading commentary on Marvel Comics' Iron Man, of all things, and why he has a gross racist caricature, the Mandarin, as his arch nemesis. From white slavery paranoia regarding Asian migrant workers in the West during the 19th century, to incarcerating Japanese Americans during World War II, to the communist domino theory in the 50s and 60s, racist white cultural notions in this country toward Asians go way back. They're coming for our white women, don't you know? The model minority racist notion is more recent, but also unmistakably oppressive. It may sound nice, but the whole thing is about asserting a false racial hierarchy with whites at the top. Of course, totally racist. And this ought to be fully understood. I first started understanding the model minority dynamic in the late 80s and early 90s, not from reading comics this time, but rather from watching a television news magazine program. Totally mainstream. I learned in the late 90s and early 2000s that the rise of the black single-parent family has very little to do with black culture and everything to do with ever-increasing black incarceration rates combined with ever-diminishing job opportunities for black men, forcing so many of them effectively to be family economic liabilities instead of assets. And I learned that this has long been happening to all races as American jobs get shittier and shittier. So I know all this. I've known it for decades. Fairly easy ideas to grasp. This isn't rocket science. Fairly easy access to these ideas. I got them from reading comic books, the newspapers, and watching TV. What I want to know is why David Rader and his ilk don't know all this. After 20 years, at least, the answer is obvious. They don't want to know. They don't want to know because if they did, there would be no chance of avoiding the awful truth that they are racists. So they play dumb. or they really do make themselves dumb. Either way, you get the same result, a perpetual mental maintenancing of false ideas that twist racism into not racism. It is well past time to stop indulging this. It's been decades. Any benefit of the doubt these people think they deserve has been squandered. Wallowing in racial ignorance is now, without a doubt, racism. No more excuses. I'm Ron Reeder, and this has been Ron Reeder Digs the Universe. Join me, Ron Reeder, again next week for another episode of Ron Reeder Digs the Universe.